Michael Padurano on the whole planet. There is not another one. You Google me, you're only going to find me. And if you're lucky, you might find my mugshot from 2004 for my DUI. And if you do, please send me it because I haven't been able to find it. So anybody who's a detective out there, please send it over. It's hysterical to look at because of how far I've come since then. I'm on Instagram, M Padurano. I'm on LinkedIn is my primary. It's been for 18 years. So LinkedIn is where I do business, where I build businesses, where I impact the business community. And I do have my YouTube channel, which is under again Mike Padurano. So I mean, you search my name, you'll find it all. It's not hard to find for me.
Perfect. So take us through the genesis of why you started all of this and where do you want it to go? So what inspired you to become this version of Michael?
That's a really deep, complicated question because I don't think it's one thing. I think it's multifaceted. Like we're multifaceted beings, spiritual beings living a human experience, right? So if we break all down all the pieces and we go into full embodiment and embrace it all, which is what I try to live in, is unconditional self-love. And spending the first, I'm 44 today and I'll be 45 in May. I spent the first 40 years of my life absolutely despising myself. Couldn't stand looking at myself. Showered in the dark, hated myself, couldn't stand myself. I was adopted at birth, abused in childhood from 2 to 14, started drinking at 9, doing hardcore drugs at 12, overdosed a few times, drowned twice, beat to death once, got a whole bunch of near death experiences, which created my spiritual belief structure beyond this physical experience. And then I married the wrong person because I was in a bad place. She was in a bad place. We stayed miserable together for a while. We had 3 kids, and then I couldn't take it anymore, and I had to leave. So we were in Arkansas at the time, middle of nowhere, USA, and I went back to Florida to restart working on myself and start working and healing myself. And in that period of time, we worked out a verbal divorce before I left. All got swept under the rug. She took my kids, met a guy online, and disappeared with my kids. 3 weeks later, I had no contact with my children almost for 20 total months. Very minimal contact, if any, for 20 months. I had no idea where they were until I hacked her credit card. Um, that was the real changing point. I've been sober 17 and a half years. So back in 2006, I got sober, but I never did any of the emotional work. So I was sober, but I wasn't that sober and free that people like to say. I had no freedom. I was miserable, more miserable sober. I hid behind porn, sex, womenizing, gambling, opening businesses. I hid behind everything, anything to avoid feeling. And then, so when I left my wife, ex-wife, and kids in 2018, she disappeared, whatever, all that stuff, right? They're sweep that under the rug for right now. In 20 December of 2019, when I was back in Florida, my father was still alive at the time. He took me out to lunch, and for the first time in my life, any one of my family members acknowledged the abuse I went through in my childhood. Because up until then, it was swept under the rug. It wasn't real. It never really happened. We sat down and had this big cry fest where he asked me what happened in childhood because it was my mother that abused me, not my father. He did the best he could. Both of my parents did the best they could. They had generational trauma and nobody knew how to heal those things back, in the 80s, 90s. So I don't blame anyone. Everyone does the best they can. I truly believe that. And when we had that conversation, it gave me a sense of peace that I never experienced in my life. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was the liar, manipulator, storyteller that I was told I was my whole childhood. And then at that point, what happened from there became in I'm trying to think. So February of 2020, right before COVID, I got physical proof of evidence of the abuse against my children from my ex sister in law and ex mother in law. At that point, what I did was I got in the car and I drove to Arkansas with $3.46 to my name. No idea how I was going to do anything. I thought that it was all going to be okay. I just knew that I had to go do this. I had to go save my children. It's the only thing I knew. I packed for 8 days. I left with full tank of gas and $3.46. Borrowed from Peter, Paul, everyone I could borrow from to get to them to try and be there. My father ended up flying up and helping me to secure the lawyer. All these different things. We met the lawyer. We secured the lawyer, And then that was February 25th. And it took him 11 days to process the paperwork. So I was within an hour of my kids and couldn't go anywhere near them because the element of surprise was what was protecting the circumstance of me fighting for my children. So I was within an hour of my kids, knowing the abuse they were going through daily because it was daily abuse, and I couldn't do anything. I felt more helpless. More, my lawyer was telling me, "Oh, it's going to get filed. It's going to get filed." It still wasn't filed. It was 11 days of that torture with living on a $20 a day stipend because my father would send me $20 a day. I would buy a pack of cigarettes. I would eat the worst food in the world. It was the most disgusting thing ever. And then on March 6th, I got the emergency order for my kids. Keep in mind, I packed for 8 days, so I'm already there 11. So I get my kids. We go to a motel because that's all that there is in these little towns. We went to a motel. We stayed in that motel for another month, and then at that point, they gave us our next court date, which was 6 or 9 months away. At that point, because then COVID started. So it was right before COVID started that I got my kids, and then the whole world shut down. And now you're talking about a small town of between 5 and 10,000 people, very inadequate uh, judicial system, and all these other things. So everything went to a grinding halt. I found an Airbnb, and I said, you know what? Rather than paying every day for the hotel, I did a GoFundMe. I got a little bit of funds. I was able to secure an Airbnb for a couple months, and I just went month by month at the Airbnb from that point forward. The guy was religious, thank God. He was really nice. He was very generous. He worked out a deal with me, so it worked out to less than half of what the hotel was costing. The motel was costing. Um, I was there. I ended up being there for 19 months, fighting for my children. Now, during this period of time, at first, I was devastated. I'm like, I packed for 8 days. I have evidence of the abuse. Why is the system not supporting me? Why is the system against me? Because I heard things like "you're the outsider." Because that movie, My Cousin Vinny, is very factual about that type of mentality and area, and it was similar area to that. So you have this Italian guy coming from South Florida, an outsider fighting for his kids to take him away from their mother. So that was the outside perception of what I was doing because there was 11 child services cases open. They never even took my kids out of the house. The one time they did take my kids out of the house, they told them that they were bringing them back. My kids were smart enough not to say a word. So child services never did anything. There were well visits to see if my kids were okay, but because of the nepotism in that area, they never even checked on my kids. Plus, in that area, it's the God is smiting, God is evil, God is this. You do anything wrong, so abuse and physical. I want to say the right word. Physical discipline is acceptable, and this was an extreme case because my son had black and blues up and down his whole back. My youngest at the time, which was about 30 months old, was so neglected that she had holes in her scalp from lice so bad that it took me shaving her head 3 times to get rid of them. Her hair was so bad it was dreadlocks. She had a yeast diaper rash from belly button to the top of her butt. Um, she had scabies head to toe. That's how neglected she was. And so during this time, I'm going through this enormous emotional breakdown. You can call it a dark night of the soul. You can call it whatever you want to label it. I don't care. It was this enormous breakdown to break through. So I had no choice but to start working with any coach I could find, work with anybody I could find to start healing what I avoided my whole life to do. So I ended up losing 50 pounds during that time. I ended up working with between 40 and 50 coaches, upwards of 7 shamans, two priests, one rabbi. During that period of time, I was ordained by 2 shamans. I was doing all these different works. I went through 40 to 50 books because I found out that I was audiological, which I had no idea why I couldn't learn the way that they wanted me to learn in school. But I was an audio. I found audio books and started consuming information, and I started really working on modalities and ways to heal myself and heal through my trauma. I also worked with a couple of psychotherapists to go through really the deep rooted trauma. And from that point forward, what's put me on the path I am today is because I recognized that the world was in a reactive state. It's, these ACEs exams and other exams say up over 70% of adults have unhealed trauma. So when you look at the world from that perspective, It's no wonder we're not at more wars because it's such a reactive state. I don't even think people understand what these wars are about. They just know that it's cultural and generational trauma that's passed down. You're attacking me, I'm attacking you. You're attacking me, I'm attacking you. If we live that way as individuals in this world, we'd be dead in a week. We wouldn't even make it a week. We'd be probably dead the same day. So, like, the reality is, if us as individuals have to pause and learn to heal our trauma and become responsive, take that breath, process the information coming in, understand that somebody is also not healed, and this is all just a reactive scenario, then overall as a macro for the global, I use my hands, I talk with my hands, is a on a macro scale of the global collective, we've got to be extremely reactive. So I've made it my, I had a major stroke a year and a half ago, 3 places in my brain. 86% chance I'd be a vegetable for the rest of my life. I healed myself. My doctor calls me the walking miracle, doesn't understand it. Every doctor, every specialist they sent me to, I came back crystal clear, perfect. They don't understand what happened. But I can tell you I got a download, and what my download was is the program that I created now, which is to help the world move from a reactive state to a responsive state, to go from unaware to aware, to go from awareness to compassionate self-awareness, to go from hating yourself to unconditionally loving yourself, and transition through the phases.
Yeah, Michael, and if I may add to that, one thing I want to highlight, a few things I want to highlight in what you said is that you had to figure it out for yourself and you had to understand what was going on. There's many of us, myself included, for a number of times, where we're more reactive, we're not preventative, we're not proactive, right? And this can go from, let's say, in our relationships, romantic relationships, and go through schools, let's go through our relationship with our doctors. We can be walking through life just reacting to the world. And another point that you made, which was fantastic, was that we see all these things happening around us that break us down, but we're just reacting to it. From our parents handing down trauma, from our grandparents, from our brother, our sister, family members, the women we date, the men that they date, we are just reacting. So for you, when you were fighting for your children in this way, trying to make sure that you were protected them like a good parent would, like the strong father that you are, was there ever a moment in time where you thought, man, Michael, I don't know if this is going to work, and doubt began to creep in?
24/7, every single day. There was not a day that didn't go by that I didn't think that. Even at the end, I was still anxious and nervous because my patterns and behaviors for my whole 40 whatever years it was, 42 at that point, I guess. I'm trying to do the math real quick, but I don't know if that's working. Um, Whatever that period of time for my life, my patterns and behaviors were that it wasn't going to work out because I self sabotaged every step of the way. So, how could it work out? I couldn't even fathom it working out. Like, I didn't know how it could. I didn't understand logically how it couldn't, but I also didn't understand with my pattern and behaviors, with what I know my life to be, that it could work out. So every day there was that question. During that 19 months, I went through 65 subject notebooks of journaling. I was crying every single day. I always make the joke that I had to order pallets of tissues to survive. And that's why COVID ran out of tissues because I had them all. I used toilet paper. I used any paper I could find. Like my kids used to make fun of me watching me do all this because I would be bawling my brains out trying to create a safe space for them. But what I look back at it now is it was a miracle of them watching me heal through this. Because today, my 6 year old, Dad, you're off. Go write a self forgiveness letter. Dad, you're off. Go journal. But this is my 6 year old. Dad, you're off. Go meditate. Right. So I see the gift in it now, but I didn't realize the gift of it in the time. In the time, it was how am I going to make it till tomorrow? How am I going to make it for the next hour? Because I didn't know how. What I figured out through this whole process and post stroke, when I released attachment to most things, almost all things actually, is that we have no control over anything. So let's stop pretending. That's first of all. We have no control over anything but our actions and our reactions. So if we can only control those two things, then release it all because it's not ours to control. I can't control what they put on the news. I can't control what they're doing halfway around the world. I can only control how I react to it. I haven't watched the news in almost 2 years. I have no reason to. I can feel the energy globally and understand where the world's at. What the hell do I need to watch the news and the scare tactics that come in from one angle or another? It's so divisive. All they want to do is divide and conquer. Because if the 99.9% raise up and unify, the 1/10 of a percent can't control it anymore. So the only role that they have with mass media and everything else is to divide. It's social media's fault. It's this fault. It's that person's fault. It's black. It's white. It's gay. It's trans. It's straight. Anything that